The first time my parents kicked me out, I was 18 years old, 3 days past my high school graduation, and holding a duffel bag with everything I owned: 2 pairs of jeans, 3 t-shirts, a hoodie with a hole in the elbow, and a photograph of my grandmother who had died when I was 12 and was the only person who had ever told me I was worth something. "You're an adult now," my father said. He was standing in the doorway of the house I had grown up in, the house with the blue shutters and the crack in the front step that I had tripped over 1,000 times. His arms were crossed, his face set in the expression he used for difficult conversations, the one that said he had already made up his mind and was simply delivering information. "It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Your brother, he needs your room. He's starting high school next year, and he needs space to study. A quiet place. You understand?" I looked past him, into the house. I could see the living room, the couch where I had spent countless nights doing homework while my parents watched TV, the bookshelf that held my high school yearbooks, and the trophies I had won in debate club. First place, state championship, the only trophy in the house that belonged to me, rather than Jake. Jake was 15 then. He was at a friend's house, I later learned. My parents had waited until he was gone, until there was no witness to the conversation, until they could perform their parental duty without the complication of their golden child's potential objection. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "That's up to you," my mother said. She was standing behind my father, her face visible over his shoulder, her expression harder than his. Resentful, almost. As if my presence in her home for 18 years had been a burden she was finally, gratefully, shedding. "You have a job. The diner. You can rent a room. Or find an apartment with roommates. Plenty of girls your age do it." "The diner pays minimum wage," I said. "I make $400 a week. An apartment costs—" "Then get another job," my father interrupted. "Or a better one. Or go to community college and learn a skill. We did our part, Sophie. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. Now it's time for you to figure out your own life. Without leaning on us. Without expecting handouts." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out an envelope. He held it out to me. $500, he said. "That's it. That's all we can give you. Use it wisely." I looked at the envelope. I looked at his face. I looked at my mother, who had already turned away, already moving back into the house, already done with the conversation, and the daughter who had never been what she wanted. I took the envelope. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked down the front steps, past the crack that had tripped me 1,000 times, past the blue shutters that had framed every childhood memory I had, past the life that had ended not with a bang, but with a closed door and a $500 check that I would spend on a motel room and a bus ticket to the city. I didn't look back. I had learned early that looking back was for people who had something to go back to. The city was hard. The city was hungry. The city ate girls like me, young, alone, undereducated, underprepared, and spat out their bones without ever learning their names. I worked 3 jobs: the diner during the day, a bar at night, a cleaning service on weekends. I slept in a shared apartment with 5 roommates, in a room the size of a closet, on a mattress I found on the street, and cleaned with bleach and determination. I ate 1 meal a day, usually at the diner where I worked, the leftovers that the kitchen staff saved for me out of pity or camaraderie, or the simple human decency that my parents had never shown. I didn't call them. Not once. Not on my birthday, not on holidays, not on the nights when I was so tired I cried into my pillow, not on the mornings when I woke up with my hands aching from scrubbing floors and my feet blistered from 16 hours on concrete. They didn't call me either. I learned, through my mother's sister, Aunt Linda, the only family member who ever acknowledged my existence, that Jake had gotten my room, that they had repainted it, bought him a new desk and a computer, turned it into a study sanctuary where he could prepare for his future. That Jake was thriving, that he was so grateful for the space, that my parents were so proud of the young man he was becoming. I learned that my room had become a shrine to Jake's potential, while I had become a ghost that my parents never mentioned, never asked about, never thought of except perhaps in moments of relief that I was finally gone. I learned to stop caring. It took 2 years, but I learned. I learned to focus on work, on survival, on the small, steady accumulation of money that meant I could eventually, someday, have something of my own. I learned to see my parents' absence not as a wound, but as a freedom. The freedom to build a life without their judgment, their expectations, their constant crushing preference for the child who had never had to earn anything. At 20, I got a promotion at the diner, assistant manager, a title that came with a 50-cent raise and the keys to the safe. At 22, I moved into my own apartment, small, ugly, in a building with roaches and a landlord who never fixed anything but mine. My name on the lease, my keys, my space. At 24, I met Marcus. He was a regular at the diner, a real estate investor, 40 years old, divorced, with the tired eyes of someone who had made money and lost everything else. He saw something in me, hunger, maybe, or the same loneliness he recognized in himself, and he started leaving bigger tips, then notes, then invitations to coffee. I was cautious. I had learned that men who were interested in young, poor girls usually wanted something: sex, validation, the power that came from being needed. But Marcus was different. He didn't want to save me. He wanted to teach me. Real estate, he said, over coffee in a diner booth while I was supposed to be on my break. That's where the money is. Not working for someone else, owning things, letting things work for you. I don't have money to own things, I said. You have time. You have discipline. You have the ability to work harder than anyone I've ever met. He slid a book across the table. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the cliché Bible of every aspiring investor. Read this. Then come back and tell me what you think. I read it. I came back. I read more books, attended seminars, absorbed information with the same hunger that had driven me through 3 jobs and 16-hour days. Marcus became my mentor, then my partner, then, briefly, experimentally, my lover. It didn't work as romance. We were too similar, too guarded, too focused on building to bother with the performance of intimacy. But it worked as friendship, as alliance, as the foundation of a business relationship that would change everything. At 25, Marcus helped me buy my first property, a 2-bedroom condo in a developing neighborhood, purchased with a combination of my savings and a loan he co-signed. I lived in one room, rented the other, and used the rental income to cover the mortgage. It was small, risky, terrifying, but it was mine. At 27, I bought a second property. A duplex this time, both units rented, the cash flow covering the loan and leaving me with a small profit. At 29, a third, a fourth. Each one bigger, each one more profitable, each one a step further from the girl who had stood on her parents' front step with a duffel bag and $500. By 30, I had a portfolio worth $2 million. By 32, $5 million. By 34, the year my parents showed up at my door, I was worth $8 million on paper, with a real estate empire that spanned 3 states and a reputation as one of the sharpest, most ruthless investors in the market. Ruthless. That was the word people used. I didn't mind. Ruthlessness was a survival skill, honed in the years when being soft meant being eaten. I had learned to negotiate hard, to spot weakness, to close deals before the other party realized what they had given away. I had learned to see property not as homes, but as assets, to see sellers not as people, but as opportunities, to see every transaction as a game where there were winners and losers, and I had no intention of losing. I had also learned, though I told no one, to see my family as a market to be studied, to track their movements, their purchases, their financial decisions, the way I tracked any other investment opportunity. I knew when they bought Jake his first car, a BMW, at 16, because he needs reliable transportation for school. I knew when they bought him the condo, a two-bedroom in a college town, at 18, because he needs a stable base for his studies. I knew the address, the purchase price, the mortgage terms, the equity they had built. I knew because I had made it my business to know. Not out of love, out of preparation, out of the same instinct that had kept me alive through 3 jobs and roach-infested apartments and years of silence. The instinct that said, know your enemy, know their weaknesses, know when to strike. I didn't know when I would strike. I didn't know if I would ever strike. Some part of me, the part that still cried into my pillow on hard nights, still hoped that my parents would change, that Jake would grow into someone decent, that the family I had lost would somehow, magically, become the family I had needed. But that part grew smaller every year, and by 34, it was almost gone. They came on a Saturday. I was in my apartment. The penthouse now, not the roach-infested closet. A glass-walled space in a building I owned, looking out at a city that had tried to break me and failed. I was reviewing contracts for a new acquisition, a 12-unit building that would push my portfolio past 10 million, when the doorman called. Ms. Brennan, there's a couple here to see you. They say they're your parents. I froze. The contract in my hands, numbers, projections, the language of a world I had built from nothing, suddenly felt distant, irrelevant. I was 18 again, standing on a front step, holding a duffel bag and an envelope with $500. Send them up, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. They looked different. Older, of course. 16 years older, the years showing in my father's gray hair and my mother's lined face, but different in other ways too. Smaller, somehow. Less imposing. The people who had loomed so large in my childhood memories, who had been gods of judgment and rejection, now looked like ordinary, aging humans. Tired, slightly anxious, wearing clothes that were nice but not nice enough, carrying themselves with the tentative confidence of people who had been important once and weren't sure if they still were. Sophie, my mother said. She was the first to speak, as she always had been. You look well. The building, the doorman. This is very impressive. Thank you, I said. I didn't invite them to sit. I didn't offer coffee. I stood in the doorway of my penthouse and I looked at them, and I waited. We've missed you, my father said. The words came out stiff, rehearsed. The language of a man who had never been comfortable with emotion and was now trying to perform it. It's been too long. We thought it was time to reconnect. To put the past behind us. Family is important after all. Family, I repeated. Is that why you're here? To reconnect? Among other things, my mother said. She glanced at my father, a quick, nervous look that I recognized from 1,000 childhood moments. The look that said, you do the hard part, I'll do the support. We have some news. About Jake. Wonderful news, actually. He's been accepted to graduate school. Columbia. Pre-med. We're so proud. Congratulations, I said. The word was neutral, automatic. The same word I would use for any acquaintance's achievement. Jake always was smart. He is, my father said. Brilliant, really. Top of his class in undergrad, research publications, the whole package. He's going to be a surgeon, Sophie. A surgeon. Can you imagine? Our son. A doctor. Our son. Not your brother. Not even Jake. Our son. The phrase landed like a stone, heavy with all the years of preference and performance, the constant grinding emphasis on the child who had never been kicked out, never been forgotten, never been erased. That's wonderful, I said. For Jake. For all of you. But I'm not sure why you're telling me. We haven't spoken in 16 years. Jake and I have never spoken. I'm not... I paused, letting the silence stretch. Family. Not really. Not in any way that matters. My mother's face tightened. Not with hurt, with frustration. The expression of a woman who had expected a different reaction, who had planned for gratitude or warmth, or at least the polite performance of reconciliation. "We're trying, Sophie," she said. "We're trying to reach out, to rebuild what we lost. And we hoped, that you might want to be part of Jake's success, that you might want to help." "Help," I repeated. "With what?" My father stepped forward. He was holding something. A folder, I realized. The kind of folder that held documents, contracts, the paperwork of serious requests. He held it out to me. "Jake's apartment," he said. "The one we bought him for undergrad. It's not suitable for graduate school. Too small, too far from campus. Not the right environment for someone at his level. He needs something better. Something closer. Something that will let him focus on his studies without worrying about commute or roommates or distractions." I took the folder. I opened it. Inside were photographs of my building, my penthouse building, the one I owned, and floor plans, and a letter, drafted in formal language, requesting that I voluntarily transfer my apartment to Jake for the duration of his graduate studies, with the understanding that the property will revert to you upon his completion of the program. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, my hands steady, my face composed, my mind racing through implications and possibilities, and the sudden, crystal clear understanding of why they were here. "You want me to give Jake my apartment," I said. "The apartment I bought, the apartment I live in. You want me to move out so that Jake can move in. For graduate school, which is 4 years, plus residency, which is another 3 to 7. So, potentially 11 years. Of me not living in my own home." "Not give," my mother said quickly. "Transfer. Temporarily. The letter says—" "The letter says whatever you want it to say," I interrupted. "But let's be honest about what this is. You want me to hand over my home, my property, my investment, the space I earned through 16 years of work, so that Jake can have a convenient place to live while he becomes a doctor. A doctor who, I assume, will eventually make enough money to buy his own penthouse. But not yet. Not while he's studying. Not while he needs to focus." "It's not like that," my father said. His voice was rising, defensive, the tone he used when challenged. "It's about family, about supporting each other. Jake has potential, Sophie. Real potential. He could change lives, save lives. And you have so much. This apartment, this building, all your success. Can't you spare a little for your brother? For the family that raised you?" "The family that raised me," I repeated. I looked at the folder, at the photographs of my home, my space, the glass walls and the city view, and the life I had built without them. The family that gave me $500 and a duffel bag and told me to figure it out myself. The family that never called, never wrote, never asked if I was alive or dead. The family that took my room and gave it to Jake and never mentioned my name again. I closed the folder. I held it out to my father. He didn't take it. "Here's what I don't understand," I continued. "You bought Jake an apartment for undergrad, a condo, fully paid, in his name. You bought him a BMW at 16. You paid his tuition, his living expenses, his whatever he needed. You have money. Not as much as me, maybe, but enough. Enough to buy him another apartment, a better one, closer to campus. So why are you here? Why me? Why my apartment?" They looked at each other. The glance was quick, guilty, the look of people who had discussed this scenario and hadn't expected to be questioned so directly. "Jake's apartment," my mother said slowly. "The undergrad one. We had to sell it. Last year. There were some financial difficulties. Your father's investments? They didn't. And Jake, he needed some help with some debts he had accumulated. Gambling, actually. Online. We didn't know until it was too late. my father finished. His face was red now, embarrassed, angry at being forced to reveal what he had wanted to keep hidden. The point is, we don't have the money right now. Not for a new apartment. Not for Columbia tuition. We're struggling, Sophie. And you're not. You're successful. You're rich. And Jake is your brother. Your flesh and blood. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I looked at them. At my father, red-faced and defiant, his pride crumbling under the weight of financial failure. At my mother, nervous and calculating, already planning her next move, her next appeal, her next manipulation. At the folder in my hands, the photographs of my home, the formal language of a request that was really a demand. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not even satisfaction. Pity. The dull, distant pity of someone watching a play they had seen before, knowing the ending before the actors did. Jake is not my brother, I said quietly. Not in any way that matters. He is your son. Your responsibility. Your choice. I am not his backup plan. I am not your emergency fund. I am not... I paused, the words coming slowly, carefully. I am not the child you discarded, coming back to fix the mistakes you made with the child you kept. Sophie, my mother started. No, I said. Let me finish, because I have something to tell you. Something I think you'll find interesting. I walked to my desk. I opened a drawer. I pulled out a folder of my own. Thicker. Older. The edges worn from handling. I held it out to them. 2 years ago, I said, I bought a property. A condo. 2 bedrooms. In a college town. Fully paid. I bought it through a shell company, so the ownership isn't public. But it's mine. Legally, financially, completely mine. I watched their faces. Confusion, mostly. They didn't understand where this was going. They thought I was changing the subject, or bragging, or preparing to offer them a different property instead of the penthouse. The address, I continued, is 442 Maple Ridge Drive, Unit 3B. Does that sound familiar? My father's face changed first, the red fading to white, the defiance crumbling into something like shock. My mother was slower. She didn't recognize the address, not immediately. But she recognized her husband's expression and she turned to him, questioning, afraid. That's, my father whispered. That's Jake's apartment. The one we sold. You bought it? You bought Jake's apartment? I bought it, I confirmed. From the buyers you sold it to. At a premium, actually. They were happy to sell. And then, I opened my folder, showed them the documents. I bought the mortgage on your current house. The one you live in. The one with the blue shutters and the crack in the front step. I bought it from the bank 6 months ago. I'm your lender now, Mom and Dad. I own your debt. The silence was absolute. My mother had gone pale, her hand finding my father's arm, her fingers digging in with the same desperation I had felt 16 years ago, standing on their front step with a duffel bag and nowhere to go. You're lying, she whispered. You wouldn't. I'm not lying. I pulled out my phone. I opened an app. My banking app. The one that showed my assets, my properties, my loans. I turned the screen toward them. See? 442 Maple Ridge and 127 Oak Street, your address. Both listed under my holding company. Both generating income. The condo is rented, actually, to a nice young couple, graduate students. They pay market rate. They're very happy there. Jake's apartment, my father repeated. His voice was hollow, the sound of a man whose understanding of reality was collapsing. You rented out Jake's apartment to strangers, while you were planning to take mine, I finished. Yes. Ironic, isn't it? You came here to ask me to give up my home for Jake, and all along, I owned his. I owned yours. I owned the debt that keeps you awake at night, Dad. The payments you've been struggling to make. The ones that are due on the 1st of every month. To me. I put the phone down. I looked at them, at the two people who had defined my life through absence and rejection, and I felt that diamond hardness forming, the clarity that came from finally, fully, holding all the cards. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm not giving you my apartment. I'm not giving Jake anything, but I'm not heartless. I believe in, what did you call it? Family. Support. Helping each other. I picked up the folder they had brought. The photographs of my penthouse. The formal request for transfer. I tore it in half. The sound was loud, satisfying, the sound of a door closing. Jake can have his old apartment back, I said. 442 Maple Ridge. I'll terminate the current lease. Pay the penalty, of course, because I'm not a monster. Jake can move in next week. Rent-free. For as long as he needs. 4 years of grad school, 7 years of residency, however long it takes. My mother's face was transforming, the fear giving way to hope, the calculation already beginning. She thought I was caving. She thought the guilt, the family pressure, the simple need to be loved, had finally worked. Thank you, she breathed. Sophie, thank you. I knew deep down that you were a good girl, that you cared about family, that... I'm not finished, I interrupted. Jake gets the apartment. But you two, you don't get to stay in your house. Not as owners, not as renters, not as anything. I pulled out another document, a foreclosure notice, drafted and ready, the legal language precise and merciless. You owe me 11 months of back payments, I said. On the mortgage I hold, 11 months you haven't paid because you couldn't afford it. Because you were helping Jake with his debts. Because you were struggling. I could foreclose tomorrow. I could take the house, sell it, leave you with nothing. No, my father whispered. Sophie, please. That's our home. We've lived there for 30 years. Your mother, her garden, all our memories, are not my problem, I said. They stopped being my problem when you closed the door on me. When you took my room and gave it to Jake and never asked if I was alive. When you spent 16 years pretending I didn't exist, and then showed up at my door expecting me to fix your mistakes. I paused. I let the silence stretch. Let them feel the weight of what was coming. But I'm going to offer you a choice, I said. Because unlike you, I believe in giving people options, even when they don't deserve them. I pulled out a third document. A lease. Simple, straightforward. 1 year. Renewable. You can move into my old apartment, I said. The one I lived in when I was 22. The roach-infested closet with the broken heat, and the landlord who never fixes anything. I still own it, actually. Kept it as a reminder. And now, I smiled. A small, sharp smile. Now you can live in it. Rent-free. For 1 year. After that, we renegotiate. Or you find somewhere else. My mother was staring at me, her mouth open, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. You want us to live in a slum? While Jake lives in a nice apartment? While you live in a penthouse? That's cruel, Sophie. That's vindictive. That's fair, I said. You gave me $500 and told me to figure it out. I'm giving you a year in an apartment and the chance to rebuild. More than you gave me. More than you ever gave me. I turned to my father. He was slumped now, all his corporate authority drained away, the folder with my torn-up request still clutched in his hands. And you, Dad. You want to know what happens to Jake? He gets the apartment, he gets to be a doctor. He gets everything you ever wanted for him. But he gets it without you. Without your money, your support, your constant suffocating presence. He gets to figure out if he can do it on his own. If he's really as brilliant as you think, or if he was just a mirror that reflected your ego. I walked to the door. I opened it. The city sprawled below, indifferent and vast, the city that had tried to break me and failed. Move into the apartment by Friday, I said. Or I'll foreclose on the house. Your choice. Just like it was my choice, 16 years ago, When you gave me $500 and a duffel bag and told me to be grateful. I held out the lease. My mother looked at it, then at my father, then at me. Her eyes were wet, her face twisted with an emotion I couldn't name. Rage, maybe, or grief, or the simple crushing realization that the daughter she had discarded had become someone she could no longer control. She took the lease. Friday, I repeated. And Mom? Dad? Welcome to the family. They left. I didn't watch them go. I closed the door and I walked to my window and I looked out at the city that had made me, the city that had taught me that survival was not about being loved, but about being strong. Not about being chosen, but about choosing yourself. My phone rang. Marcus checking in, asking about the new acquisition, the 12-unit building, the next step in the empire I was building. I bought something else today, I told him. Not property. Closure. Does it cash flow? He asked, his voice dry, amused. Better than anything else I own, I said. Better than I expected. I hung up. I sat in my penthouse, in my glass-walled space, in the home that no one could take from me because I had learned, finally and completely, that the only person who could give me what I needed was myself, and I was enough. Jake moved into the condo 2 weeks later. I didn't meet him. I arranged everything through my property manager, professional and distant, the way I would handle any tenant. I heard through Aunt Linda that he was adjusting to the new reality, that he was angry at first, furious that his parents had failed him, that he had to live without their constant support and attention, that he had called me names, terrible names, the kind of names that people use when they realize the world doesn't owe them anything. But I also heard that he was working, that he had taken a job at a hospital, nights and weekends, the kind of job that didn't care about his potential or his pre-med status, that he was paying his own rent, to me, through the property manager, every month on time, that he was learning, slowly and painfully, that being a doctor meant more than being told you were special. My parents moved into the old apartment. I didn't visit, didn't call, didn't check on them except through the property manager who handled their lease. I heard that my mother had cried for a week, that my father had tried to find work, security guard, delivery driver, anything, and had been rejected because he was too old, too overqualified, too proud. I heard that they fought, that the apartment was too small, that the heat didn't work, that the roaches were worse than I remembered. I heard that they were surviving, not thriving, not happy, but surviving. The same way I had survived, 16 years ago, with $500 and a duffel bag and nowhere to go. Fairness, I told myself, was not the same as cruelty. They had made their choices. I had made mine. And now we were all living with the consequences. At Christmas, I received a card. Handwritten, in my mother's careful script, the first communication from her in 16 years that wasn't a demand or a manipulation. We were wrong, it said. Not about everything, but about you, about what you needed, about what we owed you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I see you now. Finally. I see what you became, and I know that we had nothing to do with it. And I'm sorry. For that, and for everything else. I didn't reply. I kept the card, though, in a drawer with the photograph of my grandmother and the dried orange I had kept from my first apartment, and the other small, precious objects that marked the path of my survival. Maybe someday I would forgive them. Maybe someday I would let them back into my life, in some small, careful way. Maybe someday I would look at my mother and see a person rather than a wound, at my father and see regret rather than rejection, at Jake and see a brother rather than a symbol of everything I had lost. But not yet. Not while the memory of that front step was still fresh. Not while the duffel bag and the $500 still lived in my muscles and my dreams. Not while I was still learning that I was enough, that I had always been enough, that the family who had discarded me had done me a favor by setting me free. I was Sophie Brennan, I was worth $8 million and growing. I was the owner of buildings and debts and the power to change lives with a signature. I was the girl who had survived, who had built, who had become something no one had expected or believed possible, and I was home.